I'm going to go ahead with the meeting beginning ritual.
起立，面向佛堂，参加三鞠躬、一鞠躬、再鞠躬、三鞠躬，参加各位点传世一鞠躬，开班一鞠躬，请坐下。Please be seated.
And good morning or afternoon or evening, wherever it is you happen to be at the moment. Welcome to the February 11th installment of our online Tao study group. It's a wonderful thing to see you all here with us today. And always a joy to be able to get on here and share just a bit. I'd still like to encourage anyone who'd like to feel free to do the same. None of us has a corner on the market for a presentation, so I'm sure we'd all love to hear from whoever would like to. Today I want to talk just a little bit about the Essential Dharma, an interesting term and one that I by no means have a corner on the market on, but a topic that I contemplate at great length pretty frequently. Webster's dictionary defines the Dharma as the principle of cosmic order. That is the sum and substance of the definition. It goes on to say that Dharma is the central principle in several religious schools of thought, including Hinduism, Sikhism, Jainism, and Buddhism. It rather conspicuously leaves religious and philosophical Taoism off the list. But that's okay. In that tiny definition is contained so much thought and context and study and understanding over millennia that the definition barely does it justice. And in fact, in a number of teachings that cite the dictionary definition, one of the things that typically goes along with it is the statement that there is no good single word English translation for the word Dharma. And I can absolutely understand how that might be the case. Dharma, the ultimate teaching, the ultimate truth, is what it is we're all seeking in this process of Tao cultivation. It is the search for the ultimate spiritual truth. It is at some point in time to be able to understand the meaning and purpose of life and why it is that we live and die and what it is that we were meant to do as part of that process. Another term that we're going to use here is the term Buddha. And that's a pretty widely used term. I think everybody pretty much understands. It's an individual who's attained a spiritual awakening, enlightenment. And in point of fact, the individual most commonly associated with that is either Siddhartha, the Indian ascetic monk who originated the Buddhist teachings, or Bodhidharma, somewhat lesser known, but the individual who, according to a legend, myth, and history, brought Zen Buddhism to China, or Gautama, who attained instant enlightenment sitting under a Bodhi tree. It's a really nifty little tree with rather interesting leaves that doesn't grow here in the U.S. that I know of. But it's not really the tree that was important, it was the process. There is an intersection of Dharma and Buddha that occurs in the process of achieving that awakening. It happens when an individual, through grace and usually many years of diligent practice and study and experience, finally grasps, really understands at a deep spiritual level what the true Dharma, the cosmic order, is. And when that occurs, then that individual may one day become a Buddha, an awakened being. Yeah, we tend to view both the process and the individuals who attain Buddhahood to be remarkably special people with some kind of remarkably unique spiritual path and some attributes or properties that we just plain don't have because obviously we're not Buddhas yet. However, the truth is that each and every person on the face of this planet has the ability to become a Buddha, an awakened being, one who achieves enlightenment. Each of us has that Buddha within us. It is what we synonymously refer to as the true self or Buddha nature. Why do we call it that? Because it represents our highest and best spiritual self. That is an absolute truth, not one that very many people spend very much time thinking about very often. Once again, we tend to get bogged down and trapped in the minutia of our day-to-day lives, and I'm as guilty as the next person. I have days where I think to myself, gee, Bill, you're becoming remarkably spiritual today. And then I hop in the car for the Monday morning commute, and all of a sudden my airs of enlightenment and spiritual awakening deflate in a real hurry. I find it frustratingly difficult to tolerate some of the things that I see happen on the roads between here and downtown Indianapolis, particularly when I believe that some of those people are trying to kill me with malice aforethought. You know, it's winter here in Indiana right now, and last night we had a freezing rainstorm. It happens here from time to time. You know, the temperature gets down in the low 20s, and it's not cold enough for snow for some meteorological reason, and everything in the entire state gets coated with a quarter inch of really, really slick ice. And that's what happened last night. It is so slick outside right now that the dogs can't get from the back door to the backyard without sliding all over, which would be actually rather humorous to watch if it weren't for the possibility they might get hurt. So I had to put blankets down on the back porch so that they'd have something to get traction on just so they could get to the grass. That's the condition of all the roads here in the city right now. Happens, once or twice every winter. And yet people in Indiana still drive like it's springtime outside, and I just don't get it. And for as long as I've been cultivating the Tao teachings, and for as much as I try to be a courteous and safe and forgiving and respectable driver on these roads, when I see people roaring down the interstate at 70 miles an hour on ice, I'm just incredulous. It is so doggone slick that can't possibly be safe, and yet people do it all the time. And I see every morning during this weather, accidents all over the place, and they're all over the news. And it's gotten to the point where through the week, if we have ice on the roads, I just don't drive. I work from home because it isn't worth the risk. And when that happens, all of a sudden I go from being what I'm hoping one of these days will be an enlightened individual to somebody with not a very good attitude. Maybe that happens to keep me humble. I don't know. But it is one of the reasons why I know I haven't approached sagehood yet. So I say that with a bit of tongue in cheek. But the truth of the matter is, if we can ever rise above our desire to see other people drive like safe human beings, we may all one day approach Buddhahood. And that is a possibility for all of us. There are some just absolute universal truths that go along with that statement. And as I consider these things, to me, from an intellectual perspective, the vast majority of these thoughts are so simple as to be nearly obvious. And to understand them at an intellectual level is once again so simple. But to implement the ramifications of those thoughts, to deploy into practice what we can understand in the mind, to internalize these truths, not just into the mind, but into the heart and the spirit, can be so difficult sometimes as to be nearly impossible. And I think the difference between what we can accommodate intellectually and what we can use to transform our lives spiritually is perhaps one of the reasons for the cultivation of the Tao teachings, and the reason why there aren't 7 billion Buddhas running around on this planet. That doesn't change the nature of the truth. The first of which is that the myriad things are all transient. Chapter 1 of the Tao Te Ching says that the named is the mother of the myriad things, the 10,000 things, all the stuff that we can see and touch and taste and smell and interact with in some kind of a physical way. Everything that is part of the creation, it's all temporary. It's all destined to return to the dust someday. Our solar system in 5 billion years will cease to exist, according to modern science, as our sun becomes a red dwarf and begins to, or a red giant begins to consume the solar system. And one of these days it's gonna swallow the earth up. And I'm actually rather thankful that I will long since have been dead by the time that occurs. I'm hoping to die in my sleep. If even the solar system and the observable universe is destined at some point in time to be transformed into a variety of nothing, or to be so remarkably changed as to be unrecognizable, the stuff that we create here on this earth has absolutely no hope. The way that I describe this to most people is in terms of 50 years, something that it's fairly easy to wrap our heads around. 5 billion years is a lot of time, but 50 years is less than a lifetime. It's a number we can all understand. And so when I talk about this topic to those who aren't real familiar with the Tao teachings and who want to understand the transient nature of stuff, I tell them to consider the house that I live in, or the home that they live in, wherever that may be. And I explain that in this time in 50 years, this house may not be here anymore. And if it is here, it will very certainly be different. 50 years worth of time is going to cause for, this place to start to fall apart, even if it's well maintained. The concrete slab on which the house sits is going to degrade. The appliances, the heating and cooling system, the paint, all of that stuff is going to degrade with time. Eventually, the structure that holds the house up, the wooden framing and what have you, is eventually going to rot. Not because it was neglected or left to disrepair, but simply because it got old. Consider that just for a moment. I promise you the car that I'm driving in 50 years will not exist. It probably won't exist in 10. Right? We all replace our cars time after time after time because they tend to fall into disrepair much more quickly than our houses do. And unless one wants to buy a Rolls Royce or a really well-made Mercedes or some other, extremely high-quality vehicle, it's going to fall apart in less than 20 years. And even the Rolls, which they say is the last car you'll ever buy, over some period of years will degenerate into nothing. It is the nature of all creation to eventually return to the earth that it came from. The only permanent creation is the human spirit, the true self, our soul. That part of us that makes us uniquely and unchangingly us. It is that part of us that transcends both life and death, whatever you want to call it. And I'm not here today to debate what that is, simply to acknowledge that it exists. And I think everyone pretty much knows that and can accept that there is a part of us that does not change, a part of us that is the me in me and the you in you. It's like the Tao, almost impossible to describe, but we know it's there. Not even our minds and personalities are permanent. Our minds change minute to minute, day by day, year by year. As we learn, as we grow, as we experience things, right? Our personality is subject to change. All of the things around us are. In fact, all of the trappings of this world, including our bodies, will pass one day. So the question that we need to consider among many as we understand those thoughts is that thought to us a scary thought or a liberating thought? Do we understand those concepts in the context of some form of eternal glorification or punishment, or as part of a natural cycle of birth, life, death, and rebirth that occurs all around us? Do we see it as the act of a vengeful God or of a neutral universe? And once again, it's not my place here today to tell you which of the various philosophies, religions, or thoughts to believe when it comes to understanding that, but rather to consider the question. For me, when I came to the conclusion that in all likelihood there was no personified God waiting out there either to elevate my soul or burn it for all eternity, I found that to be freeing, to be liberating, to realize that there was no eternal punishment or glorification, either one, but rather a well-heeled and operating natural process. And perhaps it's because I'm enough of a sinner and have been in my life that I realize that I will never live up to the New Testament commitments and promises of Jesus Christ, or maybe it's because I realize that in my humanity I'm so horribly flawed that, truly for my soul there would be no salvation. I don't know. Or perhaps it was just the understanding that I don't need to really worry about what's going to happen at the end because I don't have any control over it anyway. Maybe it's a combination of all of those things. But for whatever reason, upon consideration, I found that to be good for my mind and for my soul both. I believe that the Tao is changeless and eternal and permanent, just as the true self is. I think the true self is a microcosmic mirror of the Tao. I think, and Lao Tzu teaches, that the Tao is the source of the myriad things and the ultimate principle that governs and nurtures both the essence, that is, the spiritual, if you will, and the creation, the myriad things. And in knowing that, I believe that the processes that the Tao governs and causes to occur, if you will, are supposed to be there and work to the benefit of the universe and everything that's contained within it. I've said before that our attachments and our desires bring suffering. And they do. Every single one of them. Okay? The unmoderated quest for the myriad things bring about the attachments and desires that cause us suffering and help to cause the neglect of the spirit. That is also a truth. When we neglect the spirit, we lose sight of the Tao. And when we lose sight of the Tao, our life kind of loses its way. But those two things are not an equation towards hopelessness, but rather an educational process that I think all of us are meant to go through. We are born with an innate instinctive knowledge of the Tao, a connection to it, if you will. Our feet are already on the path when we have not learned a thing from anyone around us. Lao Tzu says, in achieving relaxation, can we be like an infant? In concentrating the energy, can we be like an infant? Well, what does an infant do? It is completely pure and innocent, and yet has an optimum of essence and the ability to concentrate the energy and achieve relaxation. Lao Tzu is not the only Taoist scholar or sage to speak of that. Zhan Sangfeng does as well in the classics of Taiji Chuan. That's a somewhat different discussion. The fact that it's discussed at all says that there is a unique condition in that infancy. And yet somehow as we grow up, we manage to lose sight of that wonderful blessing that is that innate connection to the Tao itself. And we begin to replace that connection with that unmoderated quest for stuff, for the trappings of material success, for all of the things that society tells us we absolutely have to have in order to be happy. And we go through a really significant portion of our lives looking for both happiness and material success, and very often finding neither, because we've not been taught how not to neglect the spirit. A lot of people spend a lot of time in a lot of churches learning supposedly to avoid hell, but never learning how to be happy. Way too often, that pursuit of secular success gets in the way of the most important things that we have to do. And when we're stuck there, it appears that pursuit of our essential Dharma, of that ultimate cosmic order, of that divine principle, that it appears to be in direct opposition to society and the rules of success in life, and to everything that we've ever been taught is essential to be happy and fulfilled and successful. For most of my life, I've watched that thought unfold in front of me, kind of on the outside, looking at it. All of my life, I've been somewhat different in that regard from other people. So was my wife, and my children are as well. I don't know if they got that from me or came to it on their own, or maybe a little of both. But however it happened, it does seem to be pervasive in my family that none of us are really attached to the stuff, but we're all very much attached to the spirit. And through that, we've discovered, and I'll speak for myself here, another truth, and that is that the pursuit of the essential Dharma almost virtually guarantees a life of abundance and joy and peace. All of the years that I've spent cultivating the Tao teachings, or previously searching for them, we're not marked by horrible poverty or want or lack or starvation or any of those things, thank goodness. I have always had a good measure of secular success. I've never been filthy rich, but I've never needed to be. That's not ever been a thing for me. Okay? But I've always had enough. I've usually been pretty happy with life, content with where I was and content with where I was going. And for most of my life, I've had a good measure of peace. But in order to pursue that, in order to truly pursue the essential Dharma, it is absolutely necessary to give up most of our attachments and desires. Giving up our attachments and desires does not mean consigning ourselves to that life of poverty and want in the name of spiritualism. It's all about the ultimate truth and what's appropriate and what's right. If you go out on the Taoism.net website and look under the tab for the Platform Sutra, there is the coolest set of teachings ever that are appropriate to this particular set of teachings. It has to do with the line of succession from Shinzu to Huineng, the fifth to the sixth patriarch in the Chan tradition, Zen Buddhism. And without going through the whole thing, which you can read for yourselves, the essence of the story revolves around these two pieces of poetry. The first was written by the senior disciple of the fifth patriarch as a demonstration of his understanding of the spiritual principles. It says, the body is the Bodhi tree, mind is like clear mirror stand. Strive to clean it constantly, do not let the dust motes land. This gentleman did not become the sixth patriarch, and he didn't become the sixth patriarch because he wasn't able to fully comprehend the nature of enlightenment, the real spiritual truth. The gentleman who did become the sixth patriarch wrote the response you see below. Bodhi really has no tree, nor is clear mirror the stand. Nothing's there initially, so where can the dust motes land? In its essence, this poem tells us that everything that we believe is of so much importance to us, in fact, does not exist. Now, for some folks, that's a tough nut to crack. It's hard to swallow. You can reach out and touch the table on which your computer's sitting, or tap the chair you're sitting on, or tap your feet on the floor, and you can say, this exists, it's real. But in point of fact, it's very temporary, and it isn't going to be there for long. The essence of the story about what's there and what isn't, about what's permanent and what's not, as it regards enlightenment. Consider that your body, although you use it for a brief period of time, is only transient. It's more of a tool than an object, as is your mind, the mirror on the clear mirror stand, the mental connection to your spiritual self. It isn't permanent. It will pass with the body, as will the personality and all the attributes that go with it. And if they're not there originally, where do all the distractions, all the problems, and all the issues of the material world go? And where do they stay? Where do they have a place to land? I'd like to encourage you to read the story. It's really very engaging and provides a great deal of insight into the search for that essential Dharma. One that I hope myself someday to complete. But I don't know how many lifetimes that's going to take to get done. What I do know to this point, I can kind of wrap up for you here. Maintaining the proper perspective with regard to material accomplishment, spiritual evolution, is absolutely critical to success in both. That's the truth. Our spiritual pursuits don't normally consume as much time as our material pursuits, but maybe they should. Or maybe they ought to get a little closer together. But to neglect one in favor of the other exclusively is a form of extremism, and extremism does not run in alignment with the Tao. Eliminating our desires and attachments in every aspect of our life is an essential process to the perfection of the spirit and the emergence of the true self. And that's the truth. Now, I've talked before about the moderation of attachments and desires, and I've said that we have to be wise about the attachments and desires we choose to keep, because our attachments and desires will one day bring us suffering. But I know as human beings, there are some of those that we will not give up, and perhaps rightly so. I talk about my attachment to my family. It's my favorite example. It is an attachment that I will not give up, but I don't give up that attachment by choice. However, most of the rest of them I'm pretty happy to be rid of. For every attachment and every desire that we decide to hang on to, we create an element of suffering in our lives that will absolutely come to fruition. A fundamental tenet of both the Tao teachings and the Buddhist teachings is that the alleviation of suffering, ours and the suffering of others, of every sentient being that exists, no matter who or what it is, should be a central principle in our lives. The reason being that if we're suffering, how can we take any joy in our existence? How do we find peace and enlightenment and joy and contentment in a life filled with pain and suffering? I think that would be pretty doggone difficult. Finally, the last truth is we all one day will find the ultimate answer. The answer to what happens to us when we die. You know, the only thing I can tell you about that right now is what I believe. I can't tell you for a fact that there's no heaven or no hell, or that there is. I can't tell you for a fact that there is or isn't a personified God. I can only tell you what I believe, what my common sense, intellect, and heart tell me. It's kind of up to you guys to decide what you're going to believe. But one day we're all going to find out. So maybe we ought to try to live like one of these days that's going to happen. Thank you all awfully much for letting me share with you.
Let's go ahead and do the meeting ending ritual, everybody. 起立，面向佛堂，持架深鞠躬，一鞠躬，再鞠躬，三鞠躬，持架各位顶传十一鞠躬，斜翻一鞠躬。Well done, everybody. Thank you so much.